direction for, I mean, the Senate's taking this oversight role very seriously and appreciate your attention to this.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Laird, thank you for the commitment, and I certainly share the concerns of my colleagues on the committee today. What I've, for the last 5 years, I have been dogging, for lack of a better word, another agency and their complicity, their lack of oversight that resulted in the death of 8 of my constituents. I know what I've heard today is that the 11 aquifers have not contaminated the water, so we're fortunate in that regard. But I've also heard, and what I found with the other agency in looking at the history, I've heard a number, you mentioned flawed management. The letter from Secretary Rodriguez talks about confusion over the precise borders of aquifers that had been authorized for injection. I heard from the Water Board that we've had bad data and that the operators have not been fined. So there have been a number of causes, but have we looked at the root cause to try and see what allowed this to evolve into the place that it is today, so that we make sure that even with your continued oversight, which I'm really pleased with, that we don't get into that position again, because you're not going to be around forever. We're not going to be there, but what can we see that from the history of this that we can make sure that it doesn't happen again?
I think it's the lead into one thing that I mentioned earlier in my comments, and that is when you hear Secretary Rodriguez, and I just don't know in what great detail he's going to go through his letter, it really was something that emerged in the 80s and was institutionalized by the 90s and not checked or undone until this point in the administration. And I know that at the root of the other thing that you talked about that you're involved in are a number of emails. And one email that survived from a death related to oil and gas in 2011 after we were first here was my email that basically said, somebody died here, whatever the facts are, that's what we have to get to, and you have to be serious about it and do it. And that happened in that instance. And I think part of the problem is when you're dealing with something that went on for 22 years, you don't have the chance to change it overnight, even though you have a commitment to. You bring on new people, you enforce the policies, you do as I said, where you rigorously identify every single aquifer or well that might be in question, take the ones off that are obviously at risk, systematically go through. But as you said, this is something that should have been done over the last 30 years. And what we're doing is sort of getting on it and just having to systematically undo or recheck all these things that were done a long time ago.
And you will establish the processes in the future so that we don't get to that point again.
Yes.
So the checks and balances will be there and the proper reporting and requests will be there.
Yes, and it'll also be done in a way that you know. So if you don't think the proper balance is there, you can weigh in appropriately.
Thank you, sir.
I guess the question is that, and we'll hear from Secretary Gonzalez, that this administration knew about this in 2011. You know, I don't know if it's just the lax control. I know that there was a lot of chatter about fracking, and we've seen the graphic about there's 50,000 injection wells. The fracking is just itsy bitsy little bit. Why the delay? Why were we not told about this in 2011, 2012, 2013? Why did it take so long?
I think Secretary Rodriguez's report lays it out. He could talk to it. I know there's some responses to questions here, but basically, the minute it got elevated to our level, we acted. Mm-hmm. And I think that people were working together and didn't recognize how big the problem was when it first came to their attention. But
yeah, because I think EPA, I mean, our briefing paper shows that US EPA and some internal memos, this was a 2011
I don't want to let that,
okay.
I'm in this awkward position where I have a room full of people sitting there waiting for me. Mm-hmm. And there's some people here that want to answer, and I don't want to have my answer be taken as the answer for the administration when it was looked at in the EPA study, and there's hands-on people that can explain it to you.
We understand when it got to your level, immediate action was taken. Maybe we'll direct it towards the agency. Senator Jackson.
Well, I don't care who answers this question. In reading and preparing for today, reading the articles, reading the reports, I found my blood pressure getting rather high. And none of this really came to light or started seeing some response until there were exposés done by the media, frankly, and until the United States EPA, of all things, stepped up and said California is not complying. That, in fact, and you mentioned it, there has been a serious imbalance between the role of the oil and gas industry in this process and the role of protecting the public. And it's very clear that there has been a terrible imbalance, and I'm very concerned, I think, following up on Senator Hill's observation, that this is an endemic problem. There is a culture here that has been so much moved by the oil and gas industry, including statements, you know, the sort of the smoking email, if you will, that talks about some of the people who are granting these permits who actually had a financial interest in the development of oil and gas, and who were encouraging the oil and gas industry to make contributions to his wife's nonprofit organization. I mean, if this isn't corruption, I don't know what is, and this has been going on for years. So my point is that while I appreciate that we're now going to move forward with this, I want to know, how does it happen that an agency like this, which has an enormous responsibility to protect health, safety, and water quality in a state where we are frequently in a drought situation, and now as bad as it's been in memory, that we have found ourselves in a situation like the MMS in the federal government, where the minerals management folks were literally in bed with the oil industry. This is a very similar situation here. How do we prevent this kind of thing from happening as we go forward to correct it? Hopefully, because we've learned, you know, that things were not as they should be, but I suspect a lot of it is that there was oversight, if you will. I mean, how do you end up, let me just ask this, with two statements about whether or not what the policies are as far as non-exempt versus exempt wells. One, which is on your website, and the second, a completely contradictory one, which is what you use in your manual and you use for training. Literally opposite directives within one agency. Is that an accident, or is there some malfeasance going on?
You raised lots of issues in your statement, so let me try to just hit a few of them. First, no, EPA was working with the staff in 2011, 2012. It was really the Water Board that called attention to this before there were exposés. There were people that were regulating companies that they had an interest in. There was a whistleblower done. There were personnel actions that I can't disclose that were taken, and that was done before this administration was here. That was in the Schwarzenegger administration. That wasn't even in the Brown administration. That was before this happened, which led to a sensitivity to the whole thing. And once again, the two statements that existed, that comes out of actions in 1983 that Secretary Rodriguez's report addresses in detail and clearly about how it happened. And
but weren't corrected until, that they were allowed to go on for 30 years.
By anybody.
Agreed.
By EPA, by Dogger, by anybody.
And my question is, how do we prevent this kind of thing from happening going forward?
We prevent it by taking management action, by changing the culture, by changing the management, by working as a partner with the legislature to make sure that we meet those two commitments in a way that you get to look at what the milestones are, you get to decide whether that is happening correctly, and that if we have somebody that is a scientist that comes in from outside the agency to try to change the culture and to try to systematically get at these things, that we back him and we work with him. And if there are questions, we ask him. And if there are concerns, we bring them to him, and that we slowly but surely work through this, because this is not the only place where I inherited a few messes that had been going on for 10 or 15 years.
Agreed.
And in each, we've just turned the corner in the last month or two on parks, because that's exactly the process that we're following.
I guess the follow-up question was, whom do we hold accountable? I mean, we're just lowly senators. Is it Dr. Nekadom, Dr. Boland, Dr. Bishop, you, Secretary Gonzalez? I mean, we want, Rodriguez, I mean.
When you say you're lowly senators, I immediately put my hand on my wallet and look for good defense. You are very good people that are very strong and very able to do it. I think going forward, you do hold us accountable. Going backwards, when you see what the facts are back to 1983, some of the people that are accountable have not been in the state and federal government for almost 30 years, and yet it was allowed to continue based on what they did, which wasn't right.
Senator Huizo.
Thank you very much. This has been fascinating. I think for me, thinking of the history of man and how far we've come, where we can.
Speaking for Senator Pavley, who's not here, I'm sure you meant man and woman.
Mankind. Humanity.
There you go.
Thank you. The things that we're doing now with the earth, and I think it boggles everybody's mind that we can drill thousands of feet into the ground and create a fracture of sorts using pressure or chemicals or whatever the process is. I think it captures the public's imagination. I think people think of this process and wonder, like me, how is it possible? And how is it possible for us to assess whether it's safe, whether we can foresee the consequences of this to the people have made claims that it affects the tectonic plates, that it can affect the water table, that affects so many other things. And my question to you, because we got into a little bit of the budget, and when I thought of 50,000 wells, I think, how many people do we have to review that? Number one. Number two, do we have the resources to adequately assess what's going on in these wells on a daily basis? Is it something that we have to monitor daily, weekly, monthly, yearly? And if so, what is required to really get an understanding of what's going on so that we can provide at least an accurate picture of what the condition is of our natural environment in California?
That's really a question for Dr. Boland, and I'm just wondering if you have any more for me, because I am really late to this group of people.
Senator Bates.
My microphone on, Senator?
I can hear you.
I just want to commend you, Senator Laird. I served with you in the Assembly, and I think what you've said here today, and this is certainly a very new issue to me, but it's all about accountability and transparency, and I think that's what you've promised us, and that's what you're committed to, and that's what you have directed your colleagues going forward. So I'm waiting for the reports, and again, very impressed, because I know you inherited, as we visited in my office, you kind of went through your bullet points, your list. So good, and we'll be looking forward to those reports through our committees. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Other than Secretary Rodriguez's comments, are there other institutional changes that you think we might want to look at? I'm thinking about the permitting process in general.
I think that we're just going to have to take a look at that over time when we truly understand what happened to a given point, and when we identify how many are at issue and whether or not there would have been ways to catch it if things had been asked in a different way beforehand. And I think that's part of our iterative process here.
Okay, thank you. Oh, excuse me, Senator Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Laird. Appreciate you being here today, and I certainly can appreciate the concerns of the committee, and we all want to ensure that we have a safe water supply. However, because of, I'm hearing malfeasance, incompetence of a particular state agency, I don't want to throw out the baby with the proverbial bathwater. We do have a way of becoming somewhat energy independent in the state of California that creates a number of jobs. And according to the literature that I've seen, even without the appropriate oversight that I'm hearing is alleged, you've only shut 23 wells down, and that's only because of their proximity to drinking water aquifers. And according to the literature that I've read, there has not been a single case where the state has allowed injected water to taint drinking water. So while I agree that we should have parameters in place, I hope that we don't overregulate this industry to a point where we cannot tap our natural resources here that is actually more green for the environment, because it means we import less gas and oil to our region, and we keep a number of people employed, especially in Kern County, where a lot of this fracking, if you will, goes on. So I'm all in favor of comprehensive regulations that protects the water supply. But one thing that the state of California routinely does is we tend to overregulate and push those jobs away and even potentially out of state. So I hope that you'll take that into consideration, that we certainly want to protect, but we don't want to overregulate people out of business.
Comments are noted. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Secretary.
I appreciate it.
So let's go back to the duration. I have of time, gentlemen. We have a CEQA document. We have the area of review. Wouldn't these documents show clearly that these aquifers were exempt? And where are those documents when you were reviewing, right? You have an area of review document that should identify where the aquifers, what aquifers are, maybe State Water Board. Our Dogger, I guess it would be.
It is true that the appropriate, our regulations require an area of review that when a underground injection well is permitted or a project is permitted, around that well there is an analysis of potential conduits for fluids that are injected to get out of zone, so old well casings and other things, and it takes into account the geology as well. One of the features of the plan moving towards compliance with Safe Drinking Water Act is to review all of our UIC projects, to develop to look at them. I mean, we have a large number of projects. We have to look at them and assess them for what's deficient. It's clear from the Horsley Ridden report that I have read that they were concerned that area review was not consistently done. So we need to go back, we need to look at our UIC project files, we need to develop a list of deficiencies in terms of our compliance, and we need to start working through those and compelling the operators to comply with the rules and regulations. So I don't know that I can answer your question directly in that I wasn't there, and so yes, the answer to your question in theory is if there's an appropriate geologic review and an area of review done, it is logical to expect that an analysis of what formations are down there, what the geology looks like, and so forth would have led to an understanding of what was an exempted aquifer from the Safe Drinking Water Act and what was not. But I think my understanding of it as I've come into this position is that there are tribal conventional wisdoms that developed over time about what was exempt and what wasn't exempt. And right or wrong, one of those conventional wisdoms was that if an aquifer contained oil, it was automatically exempt. That is not correct, but I believe that for whatever reasons, that became standard industry understanding, standard division understanding. And I think what was the mistake was something that could potentially have been exempted became in the mind of many something that was exempted. So, and that's conjecture on my part. I don't have direct evidence. What I can say is that part of the UIC review, the Underground Injection Control Program, we will be reviewing project files, and which involves a group of wells. That's not just one well, but a group of wells, and looking at the what deficiencies are there and correcting those deficiencies.
I'm curious, Mr. Bishop, on your testimony that it wasn't until SB4 came in and you had groundwater review that you discovered there may have been some compromised aquifers. I mean, we're focused on Dogger and the primacy agreement, but your agency has a charge under the Safe Drinking Water Act also to protect safe drinking water. Why was there no independent correction or investigation or review of these aquifers, other than the tribal, traditions?
Under the memorandum of understanding, the primacy was with Dogger, and we relied on their expertise to determine if there was a exempt aquifer or not. In hindsight, maybe we should have done independent analysis of that, but we didn't. We had the opportunity to review those, but we didn't avail ourselves of that opportunity.
Could I follow up on that issue specifically? Let me ask if the Water Board has, given its new role, whether you've revised that 1988 Memorandum of Understanding to make clear that you have an active role in the oversight of the UIC program.
So we have not yet revised the Memorandum of Understanding. We have been working very closely with Division of Oil and Gas. We're looking at every project that's proposed at this point and reviewing existing projects. We plan to work with Dogger to revise the Memorandum of Understanding once we get through this high priority work on wells that seem more important to us to address potential impacts first and deal with the MOA next.
So along that line, do you foresee any changes based on your current work to your statutory authority, any that need to happen in order to allow you to protect the groundwater?
I'm not sure that I can answer that right at the moment, but I do think that looking at the MOA that we would make it much clearer that that we have a role in aquifer exemptions in addition to just UIC wells. It's unclear in the MOA right now if that is part of our role, and that we would need to concur on the appropriateness of an aquifer exemption. I think that's doable without statutory changes at this point with a clear understanding with the Division of Oil and Gas, but I would need to look more closely into the statutory situation.
The other question I have has to do with the resources that are necessary to do the water testing that you're being obligated, that is currently on the, in front of you.
So currently we have no resources for UIC control program.
Do you plan to bring a?
We plan to try and change that, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So maybe you could help me understand the permitting process, because I know your predecessors lost their jobs because of not having these permits approved or delaying the permit. And my understanding is that if a producer asks for a permit, they have you have 10 days to respond. And if you don't respond, then the permit is granted. And I guess I have some concern about incomplete permitting and the area of review documents and these other documents that might be helpful for the agency to look at. So correct me.
So, well, it's like so many things, it's complicated, Senator. There are permits issued for a wide variety of activities. Well workovers, plugging and abandonment, all kinds of things. And many of those permits, there is a 10-day requirement that the division respond in one way or another. For a UIC project, that would be a group of wells. We have generally consider UIC as projects, and those projects have a more robust permitting process that involves geologic review, area of review, as I explained earlier, about looking for passageways for fluids to get out of the zone intended, understanding the geology to understand what is referred to as zonal confinement, where we're fairly certain that the geology itself will confine the fluids to a specific zone. There is a period of public comment, there is concurrence by the water board, and so forth. So a project under the UIC program has a considerably longer period of time involving public comment and so forth, that the division is under no obligation. The division is always under pressure to do things faster than it does. I don't know a government agency that isn't under pressure to do things faster than it does. I've worked in government for 25 years, and I think that's been my experience. But UIC does receive is supposed to receive a much more thorough review.
So I guess that would address, you had a graphic, the pyramid, that there are 50,000 injection wells. We're talking about 23 so far, that you've got the pyramid.
Right.
On those the other permitting in those 48,000, whatever the amount
Right.
is that, scream or die agency? If you don't say no or don't ask for more additional information, then the permit is an automatic?
So a lot of those wells are cyclic steam wells, and those are by our regulations, which we've already discussed are behind the times. Those are often permitted as individual wells. The other injection projects, under other injection wells, so water disposal, water flood, and so on and so forth, are permitted as larger groups and would come under this umbrella of a project.
Okay. At least on 3 occasions, Dogger and the agency has come to the Senate and the Budget Committee for additional resources, outlining the necessary work, that needed to be done by the agency. Never was the problem with this aquifer brought to our attention for additional work. Why was that?
I'll attempt to answer that question. Let me start where I came in, which was halfway through a BCP request that started for 34 positions to increase Dogger staff in order to address any number of issues. That was basically the content of our roadmap. My first budget hearings were about the second tranche of 17. The intent of that increase was to address the UIC program, hydraulic fracturing, et cetera. As I stated in my comments, our first year was mostly focused on the hydraulic fracturing issue and growing the division. The division has hired a number of new engineers, and we were delayed in those hires because of the nature of the classification. We were restricted to a very small pool. So it took us about a year to change the classification so we could tap a larger pool of engineering geologists, and then we were able to expand the program. Our budget requests have been based on our analysis of the increasing permit requirements and a fairly firm understanding within my first year that the division was understaffed and, quite frankly, had a number of people who were not fully qualified to be in the engineering classification that we required. So as we moved through our allocation issues, all the administrative things we needed to do, we analyzed down to the detail, down to the position, exactly what was required. It was quite clear to us that we needed not only to beef up the numbers, but the classifications, the qualifications of our staff. So that has been basically what we have been doing for the last 3 years.
No, that's fine. It's just the agency, and I appreciate your coming in. I guess everybody's coming in halfway through. There's a discrepancy there, but the legislature wasn't informed of it. I anticipate that you're going to be asking for new positions. We're concerned, or I'm concerned, with the possibility of contamination, right? And how are these jobs or these persons in the agencies going to be working specifically to not obviously stop contamination occurring, but also this possibility that there may be some contamination, because that's what my call here is, that we may be going into some of these potential potable water that we may one day have to go into these wells and use them and process them so that we could use it for agriculture, whatever purposes. So how do we tie that together closer, the job with the perceived harm?
So there are two pieces that are very important that I think are part of the changes we are undertaking now. One is, just one example, if we are loaded with engineers who know how to construct a well and know cementing standards, et cetera, but do not know hydrogeology and subsurface fluid movement, we probably are not going to catch things that we would otherwise catch. Now we are changing the classifications we're using so that we're having more hydrogeologists, others who actually understand how to look at lithology, stratigraphy, all the things that go into analysis to ensure that we have zonal isolation. The other is we have all fallen down on the job in working across the agencies. SB4, I think, fundamentally and irrevocably changes that. We have formal MOAs with air boards, water boards, coastal commission, et cetera, and I expect that to provide a lot of momentum. And as Mr. Bishop mentioned, we will be revising our MOA, or our MOU from 1988 with the water board to ensure that we tap their expertise as well, not just in the theoretical, gee, might we be contaminating something, but actual permit review, so that they're looking at the hydrogeology, they're looking at the aquifers,